I love Qiyana's new Prestige Skin. It's where cosplay meets high fashion. Today you will learn how I recreate the gems in her headpiece. I will show you how I design a 3D print and create a simple silicone mold that will be used to resin cast Qiyana's gem. First step is to create a digital file to print. I use this free software called Tinker Cad. I'm going to go to the menu and get the poly cup shape. And to get it that perfect rupee look, we're going to set the top radius to 50, the bottom radius to 20, the height to 20, the number of sides to 4, and the wall thickness to 1.25. Before I start, I want to introduce myself. I'm Isa of Haute Cosplay. I'm a professional costume designer and cosplayer, and my channel is dedicated to how I make my costumes. Please subscribe if you enjoy content like this. To start the process, I printed the files I made on Tinker Cad. I have an Ender 5 printer and I created 2 different sizes for the gems to fit into my headpiece. Today I'm making my molds using smooth-on silicone and dragon skin. What's nice about the product is that it self-levels and has minimal to no air bubbles. Before we start, always make sure to wear a mask and gloves whenever you're using any type of chemical. I'm going to start with my larger gem and we're going to use a plastic bowl. You can find them anywhere at the dollar store, at the supermarket. Just make sure, not to reuse it for food. This is specifically to make the walls of the mold. I prepped the bowl for my mold by cutting off the bottom with some sharp scissors. Next, I'm going to place my plastic bowl over a cutting mat just to see the position, and also I'm going to take the gem to position it right in the center of my mold. Next, I'm going to get some hot glue and put it around the bottom of the mold. I'm going to attach it to my cutting mat. Make sure everything is plastic just so the silicone doesn't stick to anything. Make sure to add extra glue on the sides just so no silicone pours or leaks through. Next, I'm sanding my 3D print just to make sure to remove any imperfections so they don't show when we pour the silicone. I'm gonna place it in the center, make sure it's right where you need it, and I'm gonna apply hot glue underneath to keep it in place. To reinforce the walls of my mold, I added some masking tape, some mailing tape. I noticed when I cut it there were a little bit of cracks, so I'm just sealing everything. Now that the bowl's walls are set in place, I'm going to get the dragon skin and measure out equal parts of A and B in 2 separate cups. I marked the cups so I know which cup is which. Once I divide the equal parts of part A and B, I pour them into a bigger cup. I stir A and B really well because you want it to become one solution and you want it to cure properly. I mix for at least 3 minutes, scraping the sides and making sure everything is mixed thoroughly. Now that my liquid rubber is thoroughly mixed, I'm going to pour it into my mold. I'm going to make sure to cover the lowest parts first, just so it's nice and even and leveled. I move around my mold just to make sure that the 3D piece is covered. I've only put about half of the solution in. Now I'm going to pour the second half of the solution on top to thoroughly cover my 3D print. Right now I'm just kind of slamming my mold just to make sure to release any air bubbles and just to make it nice and level and make sure that the 3D print is thoroughly covered. Next, I use a little pin just to poke any little air bubbles. What I found out is that they actually released on their own. I just do a little bit more of just slamming it just to make it nice and settled, but it really did level on its own. I'm going to let this sit for 16 hours and I'm going to work on my next mold, which I'm going to actually be using foam core. I'm going to be measuring out for my smaller gems. I could have actually used this for all the gems, but I wanted to experiment with different ways to make a mold, so this will be the way I do it with foam core. With an X-Acto knife, I'm cutting to size the foam core that I need for the base of my mold. Right now I'm just tracing my 3D print so I can see exactly where I'm going to glue it. I also created a 2-inch border that will be the walls of my mold. Next, using the same method I used for my other mold, I'm going to glue down my 3D piece to the center, and I'm going to glue the sides of the mold with a glue gun. With extra hot glue, I'm going to add it to the sides just to seal in any gaps to make sure that the silicone doesn't leak. I'm going to repeat the process I did with my last mold and mix in equal parts of A and B in 2 separate cups. Always remember to label your cups, and now I'm going to pour them into a bigger cup, equal solutions of A and B. Remember, I'm going to mix it thoroughly, scraping the sides for at least 3 minutes. We want this to be mixed very, very thoroughly so we can get a proper cure. Once the solution is properly mixed, we're going to pour it into my foam core mold. The same as before, we're going to pour it on the lowest parts of the mold first, just to make sure that the print is completely covered. I'm going to do the same thing where I pour half into the mold, and then I'm going to just let it self-level itself. Now that I've poured all the solution into the mold, I'm just slamming it just to make sure that to release any air bubbles and to cover any spaces that need to be covered. After 16 hours, your mold should be ready to be pulled out of the walls. I actually wait the next day. I just do it 24 hours just to make sure. The one thing about the foam core is you can't reuse it. That whole little mold base is gone. The great thing about using the plastic Tupperware, you can reuse it. But here is the finished mold. In hindsight, I would have made the walls a little closer so I could have saved on silicone, but I'm really happy how this mold came out. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. I showed you 2 ways to make a silicone mold from a 3D print. I highly recommend staying tuned for my next video, where I'll be using these molds and casting some really cool holographic resin gems. Please subscribe to my channel and stay in touch. Bye!